Hey everyone, Pugs here with two new reviews for y'all. Today, I'm covering Mimic Madness and Housewarming. Well, I think I need to extend an apology to Housewarming because this is probably going to be the Mimic Madness review. I mean, y'all do see that extra section, right? Although, I will talk decently long about Housewarming too, probably because I felt bad about how much I'm going to yap about its sister episode. Listen, we've got a lot to discuss here, and so I should probably stop stalling and get to it because it's gonna be pretty long. And as always, thank you all for checking out today's video. I think it's really gonna be a good one. And so now, let's just get right into it. Oh hell yeah. I've been waiting for this one. Mimic Madness is one of the most well-received episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants since anything from the first 3 seasons. This is the episode that got many of even the harshest modern SpongeBob critics back on board, at least for a little while. These days, the hype has worn off, but if you were around then you'd know what I'm talking about. And while I couldn't care less about those critics, I have to admit that any episode that can pull off this kind of engagement already impresses me. So now, for the first time in months, I've gotta ask the question, is this episode overrated? As always, I'll be giving a long and convoluted answer to just that question. I'm also going to be talking about why this episode was so beloved, which I've decided to keep to its own little section, as I did in the original written review of this episode. It's just better that way, trust me. Before I even start covering the content of Mimic Madness, I want to point out 2 things that immediately stand out to me with this episode. The first thing are the characters involved in this one. Just like another beloved episode from this season, this episode uses a lot of the characters we've grown to love. In other words, we're actually seeing the ensemble cast be utilized, and these later seasons have been much better about doing this anyway. This episode in particular feels special because, well, it's not a special, and yet we see the main 5 plus Plankton make significant appearances anyway, not to mention Pearl and Gary get some cameos as well, kinda. So this is a full house of an episode, only missing Mrs. Puff and Karen, though the latter was apparently part of a deleted scene, so that's fun, to round out the main cast. The other thing that stands out about this episode is, of course, the animation. This episode especially really flexes those smooth animation muscles as SpongeBob morphs into different forms for much of these 11 minutes. So Mimic Madness is visually striking and immediately appealing to me because of the characters involved, and I haven't even started getting into the episode properly yet. And speaking of, maybe I should do that now. Mimic Madness jumps right into a scene with the Krusty Krab trio. I'm pointing this out because first of all, I like seeing these 3 together, but also because as you'll be noticing throughout this review, I believe that the characters and character dynamics at play in this episode are important to understanding why this episode is so beloved. So just keep that in mind. Anyway, this episode wastes no time in showing SpongeBob be the Krusty Krab's biggest fan in a cute and fun way. Not to mention with a reference to Bubble Stand. This is also something I'll be bringing up later, so look forward to that. Mimic Madness also wastes no time in showing Squidward having absolutely no care for the goings-on at this restaurant. This kicks the plot into high gear as Squidward mimics Mr. Krabs, pretty funnily and effectively, might I add, which inspires SpongeBob to do the same when Squidward lies about it being done out of flattery. This scene is just so very in character. I don't know how to describe it. Nothing here feels forced. Not that that is a typical feeling I get from this show, but I don't know. The character-driven comedy of this episode really sticks out to me, probably because I'm being influenced by the fame of this episode to glaze it more than I probably should, but I'm having fun. We then get the typical plot structure of character, in this case SpongeBob, does something new that at first is a good thing, but then becomes too much. It's a very tried and true plot structure, and one that was used as recently as 2 Thumbs Down, which I also think is this episode's most recent analog. Or most recent relative to when this episode aired. You know what I mean. Anyway, there's nothing wrong with this episode using such a frequent plot structure. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And besides, it works very well in this episode, because where the plot might be basic, the visuals and humor carry the entertainment value. Oh, and of course, I can't forget how this episode is basically an excuse for Tom Kenny to show off his voice acting chops in the studio. That's a whole heaping helping of enjoyment right there. A few other things I wanted to note in this build-up section of the episode, Plankton and Sandy playing chess, that's it, that's the note. No, but seriously, we need another episode of these 2 interacting ASAP. Perfect chemistry was not enough. I need more. Another thing I wanted to note, SpongeBob imitating Gary and the French narrator is innately funny for obvious reasons, and Tom Kenny somehow managing to make SpongeBob imitating the French narrator sound like SpongeBob effectively but not perfectly imitating the French narrator is like unbelievably impressive. That skill. SpongeBob's imitations start to become a problem for the people of Bikini Bottom, and for him too, because he loses his sense of identity. I adore that Sandy, Patrick, Squidward, Mr. Krabs, and even Plankton decide to stage an intervention for SpongeBob. It's that character grouping I was talking about earlier, and I love how Plankton's just kind of become one of the gang in a way here. I wonder now if that's more of that influence from the second movie seeping in. Much to think about. And Patrick being super protective, oh, I love it. And I'm adding that to the list of things I'll be talking about later. Anyway, this intervention scene is pretty funny, and it ends up with SpongeBob running off, which then leads into perhaps the most famous part of this episode. Yep, we got a song. And it's a good one too. And it's actually emotionally touching. Not in the same way that a song like Gary's song is, but it's still pretty emotional. It just hasn't reached that level of iconicism, sadly. Because this was a very well-made song, that's all I can say. And I do adore a good song that tells a story, you know, so... Not to mention, it's super dramatic, and y'all know I love the drama. I feel like the inclusion of the song makes this episode feel like a proper 3-act drama. And speaking of acts, we reach the last one when everyone finds SpongeBob in the cave, and try to get him to return to his normal self. Eventually, they decide to pull a big pink loser and mimic SpongeBob to SpongeBob. Of course, this works, though it ends up giving them manic mimic madness, which is a very SpongeBob SquarePants way to end things. Alright, so... let me briefly touch on the elephant in the room. Why is Mimic Madness the episode that has captured the fandom's imagination to such an extent? This is a question I've been asking myself for a long time, even though I've always liked the episode myself. And I don't think there is any one answer that makes sense. I think there's a few different reasons that, when put together, explain why this episode was received the way it was. That is what I'll be talking about after the next review, because I like keeping reviews together. So you can go ahead and skip to that timestamp now if you want, but for right now, I'm going to leave you all with the very short version and get into the rest later. And the short answer is that I think that this episode had the perfect combination of timing, character writing, humor, and similarity to certain infamous episodes to be placed on the pillar that it was. And so now, what do I think about this episode? Well, I think it's pretty great. I mean, I really do like the writing and visuals in this one, the humor is pretty good, and there are other things here and there that I enjoy about it. It's the epitome of an amazing tier episode, where I'm giving it a score of 9.4 out of 10. However, Mimic Madness is most certainly overrated, in a sense. It's overrated by the same modern SpongeBob hate crowd that praise it. The rest of the fandom treats the episode with less exceptionality, and thus I do not think that it is overrated by the rest of us. Oh, and let me get this out of the way right now and say that it is nowhere near my favorite post-movie or even post-sequel episode. It's good, but not that good. Fresh off the heels of a very memorable and famous episode, we have housewarming, which is very much not that, I fear. Well, I at least remember it just fine. But I never see this episode get talked about, so it's easy to say that it's far less famous than Mimic Madness, and I'm fairly certain that it's less liked too. Also, housewarming, instantly reminds me of Home Sweet Pineapple and Jellyfish Jam combined. That's a fun coincidence that it's similar to two Season 1 episodes. But anyway, while I see these similarities instantly, let's not forget that I do not subscribe to the term ripoff unless absolutely necessary, and it's not needed here. Let's discuss. Housewarming is one of those episodes where the plot is, let's say, spurned on instead of developed from. Here's what I mean by that. Remember how in reviewing last episode I said that I really liked how the plot got started because it felt very in character? Specifically, I talked about the episode being character driven, as in the plot is like a consequence of certain characters being put together. So that's a developed from type plot. Like, the plot develops from the characters being themselves. Hopefully I'm making sense. As for a spurred on type of plot, this describes plots where events happen to the characters that they then have to react to. And I've noticed that these are the plots that most typically could be seen as forced, unless a developed from plot is done poorly in terms of character writing. I'm pointing all this out, and notice how I will never discuss this again, because I kinda do think that the plot here is forced. Like, why did this random worm go straight to SpongeBob's house to live in his body? We can make assumptions, but it's also very easy to assume that the worm could have found a home in a much easier place, so there's just this glaring feeling of there's no reason for this plot to be happening. I'm hopefully making sense here. I only say all this because it's for once diminishing my enjoyment of the episode, and also reviewing Mimic Madness has put me in a mood of over-explaining and categorizing everything. Moving on from whatever this just was, SpongeBob tries to no avail to get the worm out of his body. Gary in this scene is me. Maybe it's because I'm tired or something, but I'm not feeling what I'm watching. I haven't been captivated, and so far I haven't found anything funny. Not a good combination. After some persuasion through a sob story, SpongeBob lets the worm stay. Just for one night. I'm sure we all know where this is going. Hey, this could mean that we get something similar to Can You Spare a Dime or Ghost Host. Now that I'd like to see. The worm proceeds to invite all of its friends to live in SpongeBob's body. I wish the episode would have done more to make the worm likable or funny because I'm simply annoyed with it the whole time. Maybe if it actually talked, that would have been helpful, but I mean, even Junior, like in Rockabye Bivalve, was a more likable character, and he mostly cried, so talking isn't necessary. Just do something to make me feel more for this worm than annoyance, because I do not like being annoyed. Anyway, the worms decide to have a party in SpongeBob's body, a la caramel dancing memes. At least SpongeBob is having fun. The visuals are nice, and I like the backing track, Speed Freak, but I just don't care? Yeah, like, I just don't really care about what's going on, so I lack any kind of connection to this episode. I feel detached from what I'm watching. Gary, at least, has enough of the worms, so when SpongeBob fails to get them out, he just kicks SpongeBob out. And when SpongeBob goes to work, he utterly fails to conceal the worms. And yes, I'm still kind of bored by this point. Maybe because I'm waiting for SpongeBob to actually do something about the worms other than nicely tell them to leave, because I swear if this episode ends with the same solution as Treats, just saying a firm no, I'm not going to be happy because you can only pull that off with characters that the character in question actually knows. And yes, SpongeBob is a nice person, but I don't particularly enjoy seeing him be a doormat to random people, even though I suppose that is an established character trait of his, and I did like the abrasive side. Ugh. I don't know. I'm really trying to figure out what's not clicking for me and this episode, and I feel like I'm grasping at straws. I think I just simply don't like anywhere this plot is going. Finally, something catches my interest when Plankton enters the episode, promising to help SpongeBob so long as SpongeBob helps him in return. Of course, Plankton proceeds to utterly fail at getting the worms out, and finally I'm amused because Plankton's failure is funny. Took the episode long enough. SpongeBob then tries to get Patrick to help him, and that fails. Wasn't funny that time, though. And then he tries to get Squidward to help him, which actually succeeds for a second, although Squidward was only trying to help himself. And of course, the worms just end up coming back. SpongeBob basically just becomes an apartment building for these worms, and finally I'm amused again as SpongeBob starts getting hysterical. Honestly, a foolproof way to get me interested in an episode is to have SpongeBob become hysterical and melodramatic. Works every time. And of course, it is his, loose grip on reality, specifically his laughter, that ends up driving the worms away in the end. Kinda anticlimactic, but I'm okay with that. And that's the episode. Except not, because this episode has a short after it called Clam Up. I'm so serious, I had never heard of this short before sitting down and watching this episode for the purposes of reviewing it. This shit is weird as hell. Because why is there a whole short after the episode? Whatever. I'm gonna briefly go over the short since it is a part of the episode. By the time this part of the episode came on, I was already apathetic to everything it could have shown me at this point, but I was, surprisingly, actually amused. In fact, these last 2 minutes were probably more amusing than the rest of the episode. And the reveal at the end that this was actually everything that happened before the episode was pretty cool. So I guess in the end, they did do what I said about making the worm a likable character, just in the wrong order. And, well, actually the worm still isn't likable, especially as after this, the worm's actions don't even make sense. I thought it was looking for a home, not a place to party. But this short gave me more material to work with. And more importantly, I liked this experimental approach to filling the 11 minutes. I would not mind if more episodes did something like this. I just wish it was a different episode than this one. Oh man, now I'm thinking of the possibility of a SpongeBob episode where it's split up into segments following a different character on the same day. There was a comic issue from the SpongeBob comics with this setup, but I can't remember which, and I unfortunately do not have my collection of comics handy. And Swamp Mates and One Trick Sponge used a very, very basic version of this setup too. Okay, so, housewarming. Did not like that very much. I was just bored throughout the whole thing, and I truly did not care. And the worms were just annoying. Clam Up was fun, but it came too late, and it wasn't even part of the main episode, so it hardly affects how I view this whole endeavor. This was the first real dud of an episode in a while, though, so I'm happy because that means we've been having a good time for a long time. And so I'm going to be putting this episode in my mediocre tier, where it comes in with a score of 5.4 out of 10. Alright, you knew it was coming. I mean, I did say it was coming like 100 times, but you've decided to check out my longer thoughts on, well, exactly what the timestamp says. Why Mimic Madness became the face of post-sequel popularity. I'm flattered, honestly. I guess to start, let me just make sure that we're all in agreement that Mimic Madness was, at least for a time, the face of post-sequel popularity, as in the most popular post-sequel and potentially post-movie episode of the show. This was especially true if you were in animation fandom spaces. Might, still be true now. I'm not as tapped into those anymore, and I will say that I think the general populace has sadly forgotten about this episode now that it has been nearly a decade since its premiere, and they've moved on to different critiques. But anyway, this doesn't change any of what I'm about to say. I believe that the reason why Mimic Madness had gotten such a positive reception was due to the timing of it all. This episode premiered when the show was already starting to receive some positive feedback from the critical parts of the fandom again, aka during the post-sequel renaissance. That meant that more eyes were on this episode than they would have been had this episode premiered in season 8 or even season 9. If this episode premiered today, it would for sure not see the same popularity. Now, of course, while this episode premiered during the early stages of the post-sequel renaissance, I also am firm in believing that it helped expand and usher in that renaissance in full. It was the flagship in that way. This episode became the key example that some people pointed to so that they could say something along the lines of, oh hey, SpongeBob is good again, or SpongeBob is still good. I mean, literally look at any review from like the 2017, 2018, 2019 era. Be my guest. I also believe that Mimic Madness was particularly appealing to those who criticized the show ever since the premiere of Season 4. In other words, this episode appealed to the Season 1 through 3 Dick Riders, but also to people who were more on the fence as well. We all know about the most common critiques that were coming from these folks. Flanderization, not funny, stilted animation, all that jazz. Well, now just think about it. Along comes this episode, which is indeed funny, indeed interesting to watch, indeed has really good animation, and indeed appears to strip certain characters of their flanderization, particularly Patrick, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs. And while I'm here, let me just say for the record that I do not, nor will I ever, endorse this idea that the characters in this show have been or were ever flanderized at any point, mostly because I think that term is used far too loosely to mean anything anymore. For this show in particular, I think that people who lob this term around are by and large the same people who haven't taken the time to sit down and watch the show past season 4. They only hear about the most egregious characterizations of the characters, think the card or one-course meal, and assume that every single episode is like that. This has been my underlying thesis statement in pretty much every single review I've done past season 3, that the show is far more than its worst episodes. The next reason that I think that this episode was so well received, again, has to do with its appeal to people who had already been writing this show off for years, and that is that there's a certain nostalgic quality to this episode that will, of course, reel those folks in. I spoke of this in my review of the first movie, but I'd say the vast majority, if not all, of season 1 through 3 Dick Riders are driven by nostalgia and nostalgia only, so for this episode to appeal to that sense, you can see why it might be liked. I think what gives this episode a nostalgic quality for me has to do with the characters involved and the music choices, and the fact that this episode had a song that, let's be real, is reminiscent of Gary's song and This Grill Is Not a Home. So I think that the nostalgia of this episode really helps bring in a lot of the people who are already leaning towards giving it a chance due to everything I've already said. And related to that, this episode also had a couple of references to older episodes. Not just that, but these were tasteful old episode references, as we all know that is another newer critique of the show, which I find to be some bullshit. And last, but certainly not least, I think that this episode has the advantage of not only being a good episode that caught the attention of the show's critiquers, but also of being an episode that was similar to not 1, not 2, but 3 infamous or unpopular episodes, Whatever Happened to SpongeBob, Gone, and Face Freeze. People have legitimately called this episode a successor to Face Freeze, and so Mimic Madness being placed in juxtaposition to an episode that was so poorly received makes it look even better by comparison, and it makes it look like the show is on the upswing, like it has learned from its mistakes and is returning to what made it great again, using the logic that these folks tend to use. Most people make the association to face freeze, which is fair, but in my opinion, the more significant and relevant comparison for me is with whatever happened to SpongeBob, as it improves upon that episode in almost every single way. Considering how much I didn't like that episode, having it be improved like this is much more personal to me. So, to sum it all up, I think that Mimic Madness, through a little bit of luck and a lot of bit of skill, captured the attention of large parts of the SpongeBob fandom, and then proceeded to change the minds of even the harshest of critics during this era. And those harsh critics with platforms helped reverberate these renewed positive feelings towards the show across the fanbase and beyond as well. Pretty simple, but huge impact. And while much of that has worn off by now, I do think that even the way people discuss this show is still impacted by the post-sequel renaissance. Yes, the critics and dick riders are back, like they never left, because they didn't, but they did get quiet for a bit. But there's not the same vitriol as there was before, and honestly, a lot of the criticism just feels weaker. Probably because 95% of it centers around one easily debunked talking point, and nobody can come up with anything original. But that's a topic for another time. So yes, in my opinion, Mimic Madness became the face of the post-sequel renaissance. No more, no less. As always, I'll be ending this video with some closing thoughts of mine. Kind of funny that I'm adding this section when I just had that whole ass tangent slash rant slash whatever you want to call it. But hey, regular structure is regular structure, and who am I but a creature of habit? I also think it's interesting to think about this topic because of how the fan landscape has changed. Gone are the days of hype surrounding seasons 10, 11, 12. Now we've got the next big meme face and speaking on a dead man, and that's really it. I think a lot of that has to do with less passion for animation in general, continued respect for SpongeBob as a cultural staple, and the continued fracturing of the formerly centralized hubs of the internet. But that's something I need to think more about. I also feel like with the growing crisis in literacy and critical thinking and even just reflection, I don't really hear a lot of people's thoughts on things anymore. Like, do you guys feel that too? I feel like everyone just gets their dunks in online and there's no thought behind it anymore. Not saying that this wasn't a problem in the late 2010s, because it was, but I feel like there was more passion behind things instead of just reactionary discourse about fucking everything. Because that's the real sentiment behind a lot of season 1 through 3 dick writers. They're just reactionaries. I think the reason they're making a resurgence right now has a lot to do with how god-awful the world is and people turning to comfort and what is safe to them instead of venturing out to try new things. But these are very big topics for this video, bigger than I've got the time to really dive into right now. It's just, I've been thinking a lot about topics like this, about nostalgia, endless reboots, nothing new, our perpetual cyclical present that we're all stuck in right now. Alright, I think I need to stop talking now. I really could be here all day, and I need to make this video at least somewhat manageable for myself so I can get it out in a reasonable amount of time. So let me go ahead and close things out here, and I'll see y'all in the next review.